experts, business owners, authors. There are 8 biases you must consider when you are crafting your marketing messages and your offer. You must consider these 8 consumer biases. We all have them actually, but if you do not consider them, you will not address and crush objections before they happen.
You are watching Influence Media, PSI TV, the Netflix of biz brands.
If your marketing messages or your offer will address these 8 biases, then you are more likely to get through to your prospect because you are indicating that you understand exactly where they're coming from and how they think. 8 biases. What's a bias? A bias is a prejudice in favor of or against a person, place, or thing. And there are 8 common biases. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I will give you an example of how it would work out in marketing or in presenting your offer to your ideal audience. The first one I want to mention is anchoring bias. Anchoring bias. What's an anchoring bias? It is the first or last information you hear that can sway you. This is why strategically some people try to go first in a presentation or last in a presentation. When there is a lineup of speakers, the person who goes first or last tend to be the ones that the audience remember the most. If you are a middle of the pack presenter, you have to really excel to get remembered and to stand out, because anchoring bias speaks to the reality, to the fact that as humans, we tend to remember the very first and last thing that we hear. That's anchoring bias. When you are crafting your landing page or your offer material too, you may want to remember this, because when you start off, your title, for example, is the very first thing that people see. And this is why when you're creating your landing page, above the fold or the very before the page scrolls, you need to have mentioned that most important thing in case they don't scroll any further, or to encourage them to scroll further. So the very first thing and the very last thing is what people remember. Anchoring bias. The next bias I want you to be aware of is recency bias, which goes a little bit along with anchoring bias. And that is, whatever just happened is what matters most. This is why trends are so popular, because they are current, they are happening, and whatever just happened is what matters most. So, the young people, for example, if you're speaking to them, you want to connect your message to a trend, because they don't want to, if you don't want them to see you as an old fogey. The next one is confirmation bias. And this is probably one of the more important biases to consider. And this is where objections lie. This is the one you need to crush. Confirmation bias is that people seek out things that confirm their belief. So this just happened in the election, for example. Most times there's nothing that you're going to say that's going to switch somebody from one side to the other. It takes more than that to switch somebody. Maybe somebody who hadn't quite made up their mind yet, you might be able to influence a little bit easier. But when it comes to confirmation bias, people have a set of beliefs, and they only listen to and believe and gravitate to things that confirm what they already believe. So even if audibly they hear something that's said, it's not registered. The sound has been registered, but not necessarily the words. Confirmation bias. So when you are crafting your marketing message or pitching your offer, you need to directly address their thinking and find a way to crush that objection. So for example, you think TV is very expensive. You acknowledge that confirmation bias, and then crushing it is harder, because they may not even, this is one of the things I have found, especially in what I do, people assume TV is so expensive that many don't even approach to see if an opportunity on TV is something they can participate in, because the confirmation bias already tells them TV is too expensive and they're not even going to try and they're not even going to bother. But that is one of the things that I always have to overcome, because I have to show people that at $97 you can have a TV opportunity. And it's like, what? $97 less than the cost of a date night, you can have your message shared to a TV audience. Yes, but you have to acknowledge and crush those confirmation bias opinions, because they lock people in and they're not even likely to listen or to participate or to hear or to view, simply because they already have a preconceived notion and they're seeking out things that confirm what they believe. The next bias you need to consider is availability bias. Availability bias says that people prioritize what is easiest or what is easiest to remember. So you need to consider that and find a way to reduce complex concepts to more simple terms, or make things, reduce the number of clicks people have to take to get to your offer. You need to make things easy, because availability bias is going to speak to ease to remember, ease to access. Whatever is easiest for people is what they're going to move towards. They're not looking for the extra work. They're wanting you to make it easy for them. The next and important bias to consider is loss aversion bias. Loss aversion bias is that people fear loss more than they desire gain. So you want to speak to what your opportunity helps them to avoid losing, more so than what it helps them to gain. So does it help them to avoid wasting time? Then you can say it helps them gain time back, but they fear wasting their time more than they do gaining time back. So you want to look at the benefits of your offer and speak to the loss that they're trying to avoid, because loss aversion bias speaks to the fact that people fear loss more than they desire gain. Tell them about saving that $1,000 before they worry about gaining a new $1,000 that they don't currently have. The other bias that you want to consider is halo bias. Halo bias is that people judge a person from their first or overall impression. This bias is important when you consider how your brand appears to the public. Halo bias is going to allow people to decide that within the first 3 to 5 seconds, if they're going to spend an additional 3 to 5 seconds with you. This is so important that even on YouTube, if someone does not hang into a video for at least 30 seconds on a long form video, it does not even track the view. That is how important that halo bias matters. So you want to try to hold attention for longer than the traditional 3 to 5 seconds that people might be willing to give you. Another bias that you may want to consider is sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy bias is where people tend to not want to leave something they've already made a huge investment in. So that's why people who are in bad marriages take a long time to leave. Sunk cost fallacy also speaks to high ticket purchases. When people make high ticket purchases because of the deep investment, they tend to stick it out. In fact, they say if you don't pay attention. And the higher the ticket, the more attention people pay, just based on sunk cost fallacy. They've already invested so much, they're not going to back out now. So sunk cost fallacy is a real bias that does influence marketing. Last but not least is the bandwagon effect. Bandwagon effect is a bias that says if everyone's doing it, it must be right. That's the bias that they have. If everyone's doing it, it must be right. This is important and speaks to the need for social proof in your marketing. When you include social proof and you prove that others have participated and benefited, you you build in the bandwagon effect. Anytime a crowd gathers around something like the iPhone, when it first drops, there's a line that is sitting out the door and they've been camping out for hours. The bandwagon effect is a real bias. And if you can build in crowd approval and social proof into your marketing, it's going to go a long way. So as a quick recap, the 8 biases that I mentioned are anchoring bias, availability bias, confirmation bias, loss aversion bias, halo bias, sunk cost fallacy bias, recency bias, and bandwagon effect bias. Trudy Beerman here. I bring this content to you because I'm empowering experts, authors, and business owners to build influential reach. I really want you to succeed in building influential reach. You guys are the experts, but you are not being found or famous for what you do, and you're being overwhelmed by the younger whippersnappers who do not have your years of experience or your level of credentials and credibility. But because they have a strong digital presence, they're being found. So I'm really working hard to equip you guys to raise your digital presence and raise your influential reach. Trudy Beerman here. I am super simple to find, and I do look forward to connecting and working with you.